You're recording. Sweet. Everyone have a good day yesterday? Had the afternoon to yourself? Maybe got some rest or kept working on your app? I'm sure some of you are like, I'm going to keep working on this thing. I want to make it perfect, better. Keep doing that. Keep, every once in a while, go back to it. Maybe take a look at it, improve something in it once a week, 15 minutes a week or something. Just look at it, see what you can improve, add to it, document it. It'll help a year from now when you're looking back at this thing. But today we are moving on to a new technology, AngularJS. AngularJS. And Angular is pretty popular. I'm going to say there's other types of frameworks. I'm going to show you some just little research I did now and what I had done years ago when I had graduated also from the immersive program. I made a decision to pursue Angular back then, and I'll show you the reasons why. I did some research. I just didn't haphazardly say, I'm just going to study Angular because I heard it. Somebody said it was hot, so I was going to study it. I did a little research. I'm going to show you some of that research and why we're using Angular, or why we teach it here in the remote platform as well. So some of the things we'll cover here is you would have got some of this insight from last night's homework, right? Things like single-page apps, multi-page apps, concepts like that. So if you read the articles, you did some of that research, you would have been able to answer some of those questions. So we'll continue to describe what single-page apps are and their pros and their cons. There is a kind of a big push towards single-page apps, and that push towards single-page applications is also something to do with Angular, React, Vue, some other frameworks like Ember. These front-end frameworks, application frameworks, some of them more specific than others, have kind of pushed this concept of single-page app design for, maybe first and foremost for user experience. Users don't have to see the page refresh. Elements that are on the page that don't need to be changed remain constant, and only the data that needs to be changed is changed on the screen in the context of whatever the user is interfacing at that moment. So we'll talk about the pros and cons, describe what are front-end frameworks, right? We've been working with Node and Express, and that's a back-end, right? So that's kind of a back-end, I would say, framework, right? Node is the server, Express is the web server. The way we structured our MVC, conceptually how we designed it, that's kind of a framework, right? It's a concept of framing the application. We had to write code in a certain way, right? So a framework kind of dictates at times how you write things. Things need to be called a certain thing in order to work. Versus something like jQuery, right? jQuery is just a library. It's not a framework. It's just a library. You incorporate it. You sprinkle it through your app in any way, shape, or form that you feel suits it. But the way you would write a jQuery application may be very different than the way I structure mine. And therefore, at times, it makes it a bit more complicated to have 2 or 3 different approaches to how someone would write an application just using jQuery, before these frameworks came out, just using jQuery. And then for me to step in and be like, all right, so now I have to understand how you did it. How is this thing constructed? Where are the parts? How do they connect? What's updating what? Then we'll describe AngularJS and what the problem it's trying to solve, right? It came out to solve a problem, okay? Google created it. And if Google created it, they did it with the intent of solving a problem, much like React was created by Facebook to solve a problem, right? Then we'll create our app, and we're going to learn some basic Angular directives. You're going to learn some new terminology here, and directives are things that we could use or incorporate into React as it pertains to functionality. Okay, we'll get into further as to what that is. Now, just to point out, as it pertains to Angular, so if you did your Google searches, we're learning Angular 1.7 or Angular JS. There's a newer version of Angular 2, and I think I was just doing some research. I think they just released Angular 7. So there's quite a few versions of Angular out there. And in the research, you might have read, if you did additional research or was part of the homework, that Angular 1 to 2 was like a complete rewrite. It was very, very different. So when I was learning Angular, I learned Angular 1, and I was, getting pretty decent at it. And then they released Angular 2, and I had to make the decision at that point in time. Do I pursue this new rewrite? Do I learn Angular 2? Do I continue to learn Angular 1 since it's a predominant tool in the marketplace, right? No one's jumping to Angular 2. Do I learn React? Where do you go? What do you do? In the end, I just went to learn D3 because that's what my passion was. So that's what I did. So I'm going to show you, just before we get into like some of the Angular stuff, I just did some research. I just did something like Angular versus React versus Vue. I think this was the article right here. Angular versus React versus Vue, which framework to choose in 2019. Once again, these frameworks change from 2017, 2018, 2019. Next year, there might be something else. And so when you do it, you read up on it. You make the decision. We're going to teach you a few of these things. We can't teach you everything, but you'll go to it. I'm just going to this. This is what I really want to show you, is this kind of this chart, right? And what you can see is React is blue. You can see when React was released in 2013, look how fast it shot up. Its popularity was like off the hook compared to some of the other technologies. And Vue also, when it was released, shot up as well. Vue was developed by a developer at Google. Go figure, right? So this Google person decided to create it. I think they left Google. Now they support Vue, right? They've got their own business. You can see how these two just shot up. And Angular here, and Angular JS, right? So Angular JS is the older version. One's going, right? One keeps going. It's got still a steady pace. It's on the steady rise. And then the newer version of Angular, the rewrite, also is increasing in popularity, but not to the extent that React is or Vue. And if you do additional research, and you'll see when we get to React, conceptually, these two here represent different models of creating applications. And they really focus on just the Vue portion versus Angular is kind of like gives you all the tools to build an application. Okay, it's almost like the whole MVC is built into Angular, and React really focuses more on the Vue. Although even in the Vue, we can structure it similar to like an MVC model. I mean, you can take these things and break them down smaller into functionality based on what it's doing. Could represent that it is a controller of sorts or a view of sorts, kind of. But I just really wanted to point that out. So if you're doing some research and you're like, hey, I want to see what these things do, take a look at it. Now, if you go to the next one, you'll see you'll see here, like, oh my God, this is great. I'm going to study React and Vue because they're hot, right? That's what I'm going to do. And then you look down here and you're like, wait, let's take a look at, job market share. And Angular and React also are pretty up there, according to like LinkedIn, Indeed, Simply Hired. Angular is fairly high up there. So learning Angular does position you for the job market. Learning React, which you'll learn in Unit 4 or 5, you'll see that React is also really popular. And what is it about it, okay? And considering remote caters to a lot of different cities, a lot of different metros, right? I'm in New York. In New York, something like React is crazy hot. You can't talk to somebody without React being. When I spoke to Owen, React is super hot in Portland. You may go somewhere else, I don't know, maybe LA, maybe Michigan, maybe Atlanta. Angular is the tool. Like Angular that hub is built around Angular, and maybe React hasn't made its way into it. So we focus in on teaching you the tools to give you conceptually how to use them. If you apply for a job that's working on Angular, or that's where you want to go, then you start focusing all your projects on Angular, right? Because that's where you want to go. You're not going to master all of them. Cool. I think the only other one that had like a little diagram was this one. And this one was Angular versus Vue versus jQuery versus React versus Ember. And Ember is another front-end framework like Angular. There's Angular, Ember, and another tool called Backbone. And Backbone's kind of on its way out. It was like kind of like a dead animal. And in here, you can kind of see, Angular. I'm going to React because React's this red, and React's still one of the more popular ones. Vue also pretty popular. Angular, third in that list. We've got jQuery down here, and then Ember. And at the time when I was deciding between Angular, Ember, and Backbone, I had learned Backbone, but just because they taught me Backbone in the immersive, I made the decision to research, and Backbone was not the tool at the time that was the hottest thing. So, the instructors knew Backbone, that's why they taught it, but Angular was the thing at the time, so I decided to pursue Angular. Okay, so I'm just gonna move these over here. I can shoot the links out later. I don't want to have anyone get distracted and start, reading the article while I'm teaching. So, cool. That's the concept of the difference between the different technologies. Did anyone have any questions about Angular just from your research, or if you did, see some of these stats? Just any questions? Maybe take 2 minutes. Field any questions if you have any.
I don't have a question, more of a statement. I've actually noticed that, by me, the few jobs there are, almost every single one of them either requires React or Singular, and literally, it's almost every single one. One of the two, or both.
Yeah, what you're going to see when you start looking at jobs online, what you're going to see is they always throw in there several different technologies. You might see something that says, "Hey, must have experience with understanding of React, Backbone, Angular." Chances are they're not using all of them. They always put on, it's an HR person that's creating that posting, and a lot of the times I look at it and I'm like, I don't know who they want. Super person, they want super developer. There's no one knows or has mastery over all those things. To master, Mongo in the back end, and Node and Express, and then to master React, and then to master Angular. You are just not. What they want also is that you have an understanding of that. So after this course, you'll be able to say, I can talk Angular, and I have some Angular apps. I have some Node and Express apps. I have some Rails, Ruby and Rails apps that incorporate React, and you can talk the talk. So that's good. That's a good insight, Alan. Thanks for pointing that out. I'm sure everyone else has seen that. Any other insight, feedback?
Yeah, I wanted to understand, since AngularJS and Angular 2, there's a lot of difference. So is it the same thing with Angular 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Are they?
Yeah, Angular 2 was like a complete rewrite. So they really changed it up. And I did have a good article I was reading this morning, what were the big changes and why did they do it? Because it's been a while since I've, read up on it. I did read up on it when I was making the decision and Angular 2 came out. I kind of was like, hey, why is this? Why is all this happening? And what I realized was that the rewrite was needed. So they needed to do this rewrite in order to facilitate the changes and the demands for application development. And so between 2 and 7, those are kind of the same base. They've just incorporated some additional changes into it. Kind of like, jQuery. jQuery is the same thing, right? Between 1 and 3. Okay, if I was to show you some stats of the popularity or the usage of jQuery versions, you would see 1 has the highest usage out there on the market. But you would think, 3, right? Why won't people aren't using 3? Because a lot of people had written their applications in jQuery 1, and 2 and 3 made subtle changes that would break that previous code. And they're not going to go back and rewrite their code to fix those changes. But between Angular 1 and 2 was a complete rewrite. Like your Angular 1 code would, if you just said, I'm going to use the Angular 2 library now, your Angular 1 code broke, period. That was it. It wasn't going to work. It wasn't like jQuery where a method might have been either added or removed, or the syntax in which to use that method would have changed. No, Angular said, we're changing everything. And they did it, once again, for good reasons. Just give me a second. I'm just going to plug my I'm just going to plug him out. And so it was a complete rewrite. And if a company like if a company like Google decides to do this, and it was a big deal, doing this rewrite really kind of, pissed off the community, because a lot of people had invested a lot of time into Angular. And they were like, hey, it's from Google. This is awesome. We're going to use this thing. And then Google releases 2, and people are like, whoa, what are you doing? We just built everything on 1. And like, are you telling me you're not going to support 1 anymore? Like, you're not going to develop it anymore, and you're going to deprecate it at some point in time? Because I used your application with the intent that there was some longevity in it and some support. So there was a little bit of annoyance between the developers. But, it's been a while since they released it. And learning Angular 1 will help position you for companies that do want to go to 2. At least you can say 1, and you can learn 2. So does that help, Pooja?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. It's a good question. You're learning all these technologies. So it's just kind of like, what's the difference? Why are we using this? What's the popularity? I see it on postings, all of this. These are good questions. Any other questions?
What are like Facebook and, sites like that using for the back end in conjunction with React?
That's a good question. I'd have to take a look to see what Facebook is using. I'm not necessarily sure. Maybe I can ask Matt later. Maybe he has a better understanding of that. I know they're using React on the front end, but I don't know what they're using on the back end.
Because I know like we learn Rails and stuff. I just don't know how popular that was, or if there's something else out there more popular.
Yeah, Ruby on Rails is popular. Ruby on Rails, this immersive program, when it started, was a Ruby on Rails program. That was it. JavaScript was needed because in order for you to interface with the front end, you need JavaScript. Okay, so I have to send JavaScript to the front end so you can click on things and have the user interface with the application. But the actual server side can run a plethora of servers and web applications. Ruby on Rails is one of them. Apache is another one. That's a Linux-based one. There's PHP. There's Django, which is a Python-based web application server framework. So there's lots of different ones, and you just have to do the research. GA had intentionally moved over to JavaScript because they saw Node as being something that was heavily on the rise. And so they made the decision. Actually, my cohort was the first cohort to move from a Ruby Rails specific cohort to a Node Express cohort. And that's where Ruby on Rails was moved to the last unit. And we focused heavily on JavaScript. But my suggestion to everyone is this, wherever your market is, wherever you're at, look at what the technologies there are required. Go look at some of the companies, the big companies, the smaller companies, whatever. Do your research and see if you see 9 out of 10 say Ruby on Rails, master Ruby on Rails, right? If you see Node and Express, then start, just keep pushing away with Node and Express. It's about you figuring out what to study, what to master to get the job, right? As well as think of longevity, okay? If longevity, you're in the game for the next year, right? Oh, there you go. Just saw you posted, Jeremy. Written in many languages, PHP, C, C++, Erlang. Never really heard of that. Twitter runs on Scala with some Ruby on Rails thrown in. Facebook is mostly PHP, Java, Erlang. Yeah, I think there was discussion. I think Matt was considering introducing some PHP into the remote program as well. Because once again, some of these big companies do use it. But there's only so much time to teach the material and to get you kind of well-versed in something that to make the decision what to teach, how much to teach of it, that's, dependent. and what we feel is going to position you best in the market. Cool. Thanks for posting that, Jeremy. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll just jump in.
I got a question. So is there a significant difference between just Ruby and Ruby on Rails?
Ruby is the language. That's like saying Node. That's like saying I'm going to use JavaScript and Node.
Okay.
Node is a JavaScript server. Express is the web application that we use. And when you're doing Ruby on Rails, right? Ruby is the language and Rails is the server platform. So conceptually, it's the same set of tools, just in the same framework that we use it, as JavaScript being the language and Node being the server that runs JavaScript, right? And all the tools that we use are all JavaScript related versus Ruby-based language, which is cool. Ruby's cool. I always liked Ruby. And then Rails, which is a much more, I'm not going to say advanced, I'm going to say a much more mature application. It's been around for a really long time. It allows developers to spin up websites relatively easy. It's very, very opinionated, meaning when it spins up a thing, a web application, depending on the degree upon which you want it to construct the application. It can create routes and controllers. It can do all that for you with just a handful of lines of commands and like, the thing's done. And then you have to write your application based on how it structured it. Its naming convention in it, and there's very little room for flexibility in regards to, I don't want to call that file that, I want to call it this. Calling it this breaks the application because it expects certain structure, which makes it easier for developers to kind of jump into it and work with the application. Cool. Awesome. Good questions. Love the questions. You can Slack me if you have any more questions. Just kind of want to jump in. But those are really good questions. And I do have some. I was looking through my GitHub repo, my actually CodePen repo, and I saw a bunch of Angular stuff that I had worked on in the past, and it was really cool just to see all the stuff. All right, so let's jump in. Start talking through some of this stuff here and get ourselves into wonderful older coding here. Major advancements. Okay, so one of the major advancements, obviously, in web development, or I don't know, maybe it's not obvious, but something that you've used was Ajax, right? We're not going to cover this too much in depth because you already know Ajax, right? Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And you already know that what is the data type that gets sent back and forth. What's the standard data type again? You know, it's asynchronous JavaScript and XML, but really, what's the data that's getting sent back and forth? JSON, right? So it's an object, a subset of a JavaScript object called JSON, right? And it just has specific syntax in which to write this, okay? And so the question would be kind of like, what if you didn't have to reload the entire page every time you needed to make a request? Like, what if you only needed to reload the parts of the page that needed to be updated, right? So sending something to a backend server to get to a route elicits what? What comes back from the server when you do that? I hit a new route. What do I get back? Based on what you've done so far.
The response.
Okay, and the response gives me what? So res.render renders what? In EJS file, right? And that EJS file becomes a collection of partials and some core data, right? So I can import a header and a footer and then loop through the content that I just requested from the database, loop through it, build out the thing, and then send me a brand new file. And so my page refreshes and I see the data, the new data, but after a page refresh. So the things that I didn't need to rewrite or re-render, like the nav and the footer, got re-rendered anyway, right? So we want to create some sort of system where it's just like, hey, keep those things there. And how about, what if we could use Ajax? You've been using URLs as the conduit in which to send data to a server. and request data from the server, and the server has been giving you EJS files, right? And that means that you have to refresh your page. What if all my routes rendered data? They didn't give me an EJS file. They did res.json, and they sent me JSON data. Every route I have sends me JSON data. Okay, maybe the default route sends me an index page at that point in time, because I still need an index, I still need CSS, I still need the JavaScript, I still need to see something. So in the end, it has to give me something, right? But what about every other route? /recipes, /movies, everything gave me back data, right? That's what was given to me. And anything that I send back over there is also going to be data. So we're going to be sending back and forth just JSON data. That's all we're going to do, JSON data. We could, at that point in time, just have our front end run AJAX requests. That's it. We could just have jQuery.ajax and request some data. The data comes in, and then the front end just maps through the data and builds out that data onto the screen. We could use jQuery to grab something, hide the element, and then show another element, loop through the data, build it. So we could do updating using that, okay? And that's kind of conceptually what single-page apps are doing. They're actually, the front end isn't necessarily, it is hitting routes on the back end, but those routes are delivering data. And it's up to the front end to decide how to update the view with that data. That's really what's happening, okay? And then, think about how Google, when they're, the Google Maps embedded in a web page, when you click on the map, you can move around and do all this stuff, right? But the page doesn't reload, right? It doesn't reload. The page just kind of moves. It's very fluid. How is that being done, right? It's not as though every time I move, we go to a route, the route sends back a full page with the new version of the Google Map. That's not what happens. So something is happening just in the confines of that map. And the Google Mapping tool is just an API that allows you to do that. And it's responsible for sending back and forth connection to the Google server, right? The other real big thing here is that it allows for a better user experience. It is faster, and because you don't have to reload the whole page, right? I'm going to send you the data, and then you render the data. So the server doesn't need to build out an EJS file, build it out, stick in partials, and then package the whole thing and then send it to you. EJS file doesn't need to do that. EJS file is like, oh, you just want the data, here's the data, and then you, client, you process it. Like, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to loop through the data and build anything. You build it, right? So I'm taking some of the processing off of the server now. The server's not responsible for that. The server's just responsible for kind of hitting the model, right? The route hits a control, and the control is like, oh, go get the data, grab the data, send the data back. That's it. So the server becomes more performant because it doesn't need to do as much as it did before, okay? And then all of this, this opened the door for single-page apps. And so single-page app design is kind of the way to go. It is conceptually how people should be writing their application. Now, that being said, you go to some large sites like Amazon, eBay, they're still using that kind of EJS templating system or some sort of templating system. That's what they do. They have much more large, complex systems in place where single-page app design probably wasn't the tool back then. And so their system is so complicated and structured and in place right now, there's no need for them at this point in time to jump over to, right? Amazon is the billion-dollar behemoth beating everyone else out there, right? Do they need to do anything to change their front end? Everyone's using Amazon regardless. If I see something online, I'm like, oh, I like that. I go to Amazon and I order it on Amazon. I don't even never order it from the site. So what are the pros and cons of this, right? So pros, fast. Resources are loaded once. I get the HTML file. Sweet. I get the CSS and the JavaScript. And then we just use AJAX to send back and forth the requests for data. The client's browser is what renders the view rather than the server. right? So this is going to allow for a faster experience. I mean, everyone's machine these days are so performant. You buy the normal average everyday user of a laptop or a desktop probably buys a machine that way exceeds what their performance needs are, right? And so you're buying for this thing to last you for the next 5 years. And even then, in 5 years, the thing, depending on what you're doing, if you're just surfing the web, it's probably going to last you. So unless you're a developer needing of the additional processing and RAM, what you get in the store is far exceeds what you need. So if the machine itself, if your local machine has that ability to like process things without slowing your machine down at all, then let's offload our processing of our application, some of it to your particular machine, right? We can separate the data from the views, right? So by making the back end have the points that are just data. Okay, so at that point in time, our server really becomes an API kind of server. It renders data. That's what it is. So when you were in Unit 1, when you were looking through those lists of APIs and you built all your applications and you hit a server and you got back data, and depending on the routes that you used, it always returned some kind of data, never a view, just JSON, right? That's what we're emulating. We want our server. We kind of want to split the functionality between the front end, the view portion, and our back end. And our back end really becomes kind of an API server. That's what it is. It's just an API server that then renders the data. Okay. But what are the cons, right? The initial load time can be slow because there could be a lot of code to download on that initial. I need all this additional maybe JavaScript functionality, because Angular is still going to be wrapped up in the app.js file that we send to the client. It is the client that has the app.js file. Okay, it's the client that when you click on something knows what route it should go to, and because those click events and all that functionality is happening on the front end, we kind of have to shift our application functionality from the back end to the front end. The back end is just an API service. So there's routes, there's a controller that just gets data, returns data, and then the client is the thing that's doing the thinking now. It's actually thinking more about clicking on this, let's go through this, let's make the thing, let's get the thing, let's format the data, whatever we want to do, right? And then the other thing is building very large apps can get tricky very fast. You know, new frameworks. There's always a new framework, right? So React was hot. People were learning it. Like I said, when I was in my cohort, React had just kind of come out the year before, and people were like, oh, there's React. I didn't really know. I just knew people were talking about it. I didn't do any research. I was looking more into the Angular side of things. They were teaching us Backbone, so that there was more frameworks. So I thought frameworks were the thing. Now Vue has come out, right? And Vue is also that kind of on the rise. And it's because of the structure of the applications. The concepts are changing, depending on what you're trying to build. Now, when it comes to the front-end frameworks, right, we can build a single-page application with vanilla JavaScript or jQuery, right? Not a lot of companies do that. But don't be surprised. I've spoken to some WDI or SEI graduates, and one of the students I spoke to recently said their company, the company they're working with, is doing everything in vanilla JavaScript. And I was like, really? That's kind of odd. They're not even using jQuery? And they're like, nope. They do use React in certain groups, development groups within the company, but the company that they were working in just built the app in JavaScript. So don't be surprised when you go in, they're like, hey, how do you grab these documents? You know, how do you manipulate the DOM using JavaScript? And then you're going to be like, I don't know, document dot get something by something, right? And how do you update it? So, you know, get ready to kind of go back and learn how to manipulate the DOM using JavaScript just as much as you did with jQuery. But as much as, you know, kind of we favored jQuery for a really long time, and we still kind of do over JavaScript, right? The idea of writing less and doing more is always the main goal of a developer, right? I want to get something out as quick as possible so I can deliver the project and I can go to the next project, right? So adding in more effort to do something when I can achieve the same results with another tool in half the time, I mean, that becomes kind of a no-brainer, right? Especially if you're the company paying. If you had your own business, you would make those same decisions. You wouldn't be like, I'm going to hire this developer and it's going to take them 10 hours. This one's going to take 4 hours because they're using this thing. I just saved myself 6 hours and maybe $100 an hour, $600. You're going to make those decisions, right? Now, some of the other popular kind of frameworks out there, once again, do your research, but there's Backbone, which once again, kind of on the decline. It's an older type framework. Ember also. Meteor is a big one too. Meteor, there's Knockout, there's AngularJS. And I just want to mention, like, AngularJS is always referencing the Angular 1 framework, the 1 version, and Angular is always referencing 2 and beyond. I think, once again, I think they're up to 7 right now. And then there's Vue and React, which are more of the front-end frameworks, okay? And you probably have to learn at least a front-end framework and a more full MVC modeled framework when you enter the market. They're probably going to expect that you have that understanding, okay? As of March 2018, the landscape continues to change, right? These framework fatigue where people are just tired of all the options. Like, there's so many things, I don't know, what should I do? And that, when you consider these things, you have to consider speed, the code organization, the managing of state, this kind of key word here, state. And when you get into the world of React, you'll hear state, state, state. State is the state of your application, really. What is your application? What is the data that your application is aware of right this moment? That becomes the state of your application, not the data that's in the database, just sitting there, but the actual data that's in front of you. What you're viewing, what you're interfacing with, that becomes the state of your application, the active data portion of it. And so there's this concept of managing state and state managing tools like Redux or MobX, these other tools that are more for, once again, that kind of front end. But I think you could use something like MobX with Angular. And then you came out with Angular, right? 2009, first blockbuster framework. Google, once again, it's one of those things. Anytime Google comes out with something, you automatically think like, man, this is going to be the thing. I think yesterday when Owen was demonstrating his product and it was Mapbox, I did some research on using Mapbox versus Google, versus some of the other mapping tools. And you can see that Google, they had a characteristic, a rating that was called Gorilla. And Gorilla represented the weight of this company in the market, right? And if Google says, we're going to start doing this, you can believe a lot of companies are going to start adopting Google, right? Support, the amount of money that they're going to put into the application. So when they stamp their name on something, you can almost guarantee the thing is going to be around for some time. Although Google Glasses, did anybody ever use Google Glasses? Anyone ever get to play with them? Or use any sort of thing like the Google Glasses? Does anybody remember them?
Yeah, I was talking about them the other day. Did they get to a market, or what happened to them?
They had them a couple of years ago. My company, the company that I work for, bought a few of them. They wanted to test them out. And I got to test it out. It's kind of wild, but the technology just wasn't there. The demand, it just wasn't at the stage where and it's like $1,000 for a pair of glasses that you couldn't do a lot with. So the functionality just wasn't there at the time. And I don't know if they still are out doing Google Glasses. I think it's still a thing at Google, but it's not something that has really no one's talking about it. They'll talk about the latest iPhone versus Google Glasses. So, but it was cool. And it is an awesome concept.
They just got put on blast so hard for being creepy tech that I think they were just you know what, fuck this, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Weren't they also worried about it being a safety issue or something like that?
It could be because people have glasses on now and they're walking down the street. I mean, if you can't text while you're driving, imagine having Google Glasses on while you're driving. Your attention is going to be elsewhere. Imagine trying to cross the street in Manhattan with your glasses on and you're trying to look at stuff. There's a difference between having your phone here and your peripheral vision monitoring the space around you versus now you're focusing directly on this tiny little screen and you're trying to click your eye to move things around. your attention really goes towards something else. So it could be dangerous in that concept. But
well, wasn't there also at a point they were like trying to ban or make it illegal to text while you're in the crosswalk or something like that? I remember hearing about that a while back.
I don't know, probably not in New York. I don't think you can control that.
It was in the city because there was, I guess somebody got hit and they were like, it was because they weren't paying attention and they just walked into the middle of the street because they were texting.
You should pay attention. That's really what it boils down to. Yeah. Cool. So once again, in 2016, Angular 2 came out. Okay, so 2009, Angular 1, been around for a really long time by that time, right? But it reached the point of no return where all the refactoring could not have made it any better. They needed to kind of do a complete rewrite, and that's what they did. But once it was open source, free to use, just like React, just like all these frameworks. All the frameworks want you to use them. They want you to adopt them. If you adopt them, then their companies, you're invested in their company and their developers. And now they can send people, you can send people to train, they can train them, they can build the apps for you. So there's a lot of investment in that. And then, what Angular does, it handles the view in the MVC model. Now, what it also is, there's other types of models. There's also this MVVM model. I think in Unit 1, I had sent out a book by this guy, Adami Asami, that was on JavaScript patterns. And some of the patterns were MVC, MVVM, MVP, presentation model, different conceptual ways of kind of viewing the data. One of the other things was two-way binding. That the data that was on the screen and the data here, if I updated it here, it updated it here in the JavaScript. If I updated in the JavaScript, it immediately showed up on the screen. So there was this dynamic connection between the two. Okay, it was almost like, if you use jQuery to do that, if jQuery grabs, if you update something or I send a value to the JavaScript and the JavaScript's like, all right, I'm going to calculate the number. Oh, you want to update the thing on the screen? Then I got to do jQuery, grab the element.html, and then give it the new data, right? That's what you had to do with jQuery. With Angular, Angular already has a connection to that. And if I update the variable inside of the Angular, inside of the app.js, that data that's pointing to that variable in the app.js file became updated. That was two-way binding. If I type something in here, it was updated here dynamically. So this was already happening under the hood. So this two-way binding is great. Unlike React, React is one-way binding. It's not two-way binding. So you actually have to update the thing for the thing to actually send the data back to the screen. So it's two-way binding, which is really cool. It was fast. So yeah, HTML templates, you could write HTML as you would normally. You just have to add some JavaScript functionality. That's it, right? Just like using EJS, right? You're using templates, and then in the templates, you're incorporating JavaScript, right? Using the brackets and the % sign and equal, you can incorporate JavaScript into the template, okay? Here we're going to be using things like inside of the HTML, you're going to see a lot of just HTML-based text versus using the JavaScript portion of jQuery. So there's two portions of that, and you'll see that done. We still need to kind of enumerate JavaScript in the template. You did that, once again, with the greater than, less than sign and the % sign in EJS. And in Angular, we're going to do it with double curly braces, 2 curly braces on each side, enumerates JavaScript. And then directives. This is the other thing that I had mentioned, right? These mark DOM elements to React. So they kind of say, I'm directing the DOM element to look inside of the Angular app and do what this thing is supposed to be doing. So there are directives like click events, ng click, ng show, ng if. These become directives. These become sort of an indication as to an action that will happen based on this. Okay, and they're always preceded by ng and then the directive name. And then services. We can kind of inject services into our Angular app, kind of just like we would do a require. Remember in Node, we would say, hey, require this, right? Express, require, express. And then we had access to express. Well, Angular already has lots of services that they provide, and we make the distinction when we're building our app, which of those services we want to incorporate. And we'll be incorporating the HTTP service in the afternoon in order for us to make AJAX calls, okay? So that's the difference. Directives are HTML kind of specific. Services are app.js specific services, okay? Cool. So we're going to build our own app. So go into your student samples folder. I'm going to go into unit 3. Oop. Change directory into week 07. Can't believe it's like 7 weeks in already. Oof. Instructor samples. Boom. There we go. Okay. I'll zoom in a little bit. Just, I don't need this thing to be super huge here. Just a little bit more. All right, get rid of all that. So here, I'm going to do mkdir first underscore app. Bloop. Right, if I ls minus l, boom. See that I have this app. We're going to change into first underscore app. Bloop. ls, nothing's in there. Let's touch index HTML and app.js. Nope. ls minus l. Have my 2 files. Cool. We could do, let me say Adam dot. I'm just going to open it up. And we have Adam right here. Let me open it up twice. Awesome. Here's my first
Should we have that git keep file or no?
The git, I don't know. I don't think you have to worry about the git keep file. No, the git keep file, what happens is in some of the folders, right? When we push up our folder structure, you can't push up empty folders to GitHub. You can't do that. It won't let you do that. So what we do in order to create the structure for the units ahead of time, and then push up the content later, is we have the folders created, and we just put placeholders here. We put this dot git keep. It could be dot anything. It could be any. It could just be readme, dot md, anything, so that there is a file. So when you push it up to GitHub, GitHub's like, oh, here, this has something in it, so I will create the folder to support the something. But you can't push up an empty folder to GitHub. Just not going to work. Okay. Some of you might have already realized that. Anyone actually experienced that? Tried to do it and then we're like, hey, why is this not working? No? Okay. It'll happen. You'll see. All right. So we're going to add the HTML kind of boilerplate, right? I think I turned off my Emmet. Let me see. Did I turn off my Emmet? Nope. Is it HTML? It's been a while since I just created the structure here. Offhand, what's the
exclamation point tab?
Yeah, I did that, and I didn't. What I think I did was what?
You're in your git keep file.
Oh, shit. No wonder why. Okay. There you go. There you go. That does it. I knew it worked. I was just like, hey, why is that not working? It depends on the file, right? So we're here. And that's our default, right? So this is what gets created by default. We have this viewport. This one particular tag, I think when I was working with a few of you on your responsive, and when you were doing the responsive in Chrome, you were like, hey, why does it not look good? Because of this. If you didn't have this, it's not going to render the viewport or determine the viewport to take your application and kind of render it appropriately. So this, you would have needed this, okay, for that. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to copy this because I don't want to type all this out. We both know if we type that out, it's going to take forever, but I'm going to put that in the head. So right here, I'm just going to put a little comment and say, import Angular JS, right? Because Angular JS is the 1.0 version, right? The 1.x version, and I'm just going to paste that there, okay? So now we have the 1 version imported. Just move this up a little bit, which means now we can start using it, right? Now that we have that, we also, because we have this app.js and Angular's loaded first, and then we're going to have our app loaded afterwards, right? Once Angular's loaded as a dependency, then we can load the our app.js file. So let me see, script, let me try this. Source, I'm just doing some Emmet, some cool Emmet stuff. App.js, if I do that and I tab, bloop, creates that. I'm just gonna leave that like that. I don't know if anybody's been using that at all, been playing with Emmet, but doing something like this with Emmet allows us to create a script tag. The brackets mean I'm adding some sort of attribute. Give the attribute name is equal to, and in quotes, just put what I want. And I will tab that, right? Sweet. Just gonna put here, let's import our app.js file. Okay, and so that's where our functionality resides, inside of app.js. Okay, so what we're gonna be doing is creating modules. So our application has the ability to be broken down into several pieces of functionality, okay? Our modules, they themselves can have as many controllers as we want. And the controllers are gonna be similar to kind of what we did in Node, right? Controllers control functionality. They control the connection between the view and the data, right? So if you want data or you want to manipulate data and it's coming from the view, it goes through this control. The controller's meant to like process that connection. What data do you need? Do you need it formatted? What do you need done to it? I can send it back to you. Node and Express, we kind of chose to render it with a view. With our controller is just going to like send it back to Angular because Angular's already got its hooks into the front-end application, right? Now, in order to make sure that our module encompasses all our HTML, because the question is going to be, where in this HTML file do we want our application to manage that subsection? So our application could be, we could create multiple Angular applications on the same page. We could break down the functionality of a large application into smaller things, smaller applications, and those applications could have smaller controllers that do something very specific. And so what we're going to start using is the directive. And I mentioned that the directive is what we put into the HTML. So a directive is HTML specific, okay? So in our HTML over here, right, I'm just going to put a little note, add the Angular directive ng app. Okay, so I'm going to go into our HTML tag and do ng app is equal to my app. What we're telling Angular at this point too, I mean, this is pretty high. We could probably put it here in the body also. So there's different places closer to where you want the functionality. What we're saying is our Angular application is going to have dominion over everything between the HTML tags. Anything that we want Angular to manage, Angular can manage. Okay, if this directive was in a subset of that functionality, if in the body, don't type this, I'm just kind of showing you conceptually, if I had a section here, and in that section I had another ng app is equal to Joe's app, right? If I had that, Joe's app would manage just this. It would not have exposure to anything outside of that section. It would only know or manage this piece of the HTML. Okay, so the scope at which you define your app determines the extent to that app's control over the HTML and the functionality. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of this. I just wanted to show you that these two would be two different apps at this point in time. Okay. this app cannot control this one, but this app could, in essence, have some dominion over this because it is kind of nested, but then this app also has dominion. So you might run into problems having these larger subsets of apps and then smaller apps. If we wanted to have two separate apps, then we could create two different sections and both apps could control that separately. But in the same app, we also have controllers that do this. If I really wanted this to be a different portion of my app, same app, then I would use a controller to do that. You're about to see that in action in just a moment. Okay. I'm just going to see here. What I might do right now, though, is, it's 10:56. Before we actually start jumping into the rest of the app, why don't we take, say, a 10-minute break, and then we come back, we can start building out the rest of the application. So 10:56, 11:06. So why don't we come back at 11:06, take a break, and come back at 11:06 sharp. Boom. Cool. And if you have questions, you can Slack me. I'm just going to go get some water, but I'll come back and answer your questions if anything. See you in a bit. let's take a look. Okay. So, all right, everyone's back. Here, I'm just pasting this little tutorial. The question was, Owen had asked me just to kind of follow up on the directives and the naming convention of that directive that we had to write. Right, the directive that we wrote was called ngapp, right? ngapp, and then we gave it whatever the name we wanted, right? This name here, the name of your app can be whatever you want it to be. The directive itself cannot be anything you want it to be. So there is a naming convention here for these directives. Okay, we're using ngapp, right? And that's to bootstrap the Angular application. We're going to use several of these. We're going to be using ng controller later on today, possibly ng model, if not today. Next week, ng repeat we'll use, ng show, ng if. These directives do something. They are HTML specific. You add them in the HTML and they direct the Angular app to do something. That's the intent. That's why they're called directives. Adding them here directs a specific action or a reference to something in the application. Okay, so our needing to add ngapp here was key. We're going to do ng controller in just a minute as well. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. Let's open up my app. And so I'm going to go into the app now. We created kind of a reference to this. I think if I, let me see, if I open this up right now, this thing here, I just open up the HTML file. Oh no, that's tutorials, right? Let me go back here. There we go. Copy full path, blank. Right? You know, nothing's going to show here. We're not even getting any errors or anything as of yet, right? Cool. I'm just going to put here, maybe like an H1. I just want to, for my own sake, just say hello. Make sure the app runs. All right, here we go, hello. And now I get this error message, okay? We're running the application and it's saying something like, what I'm getting is it's like, hey, I don't know, you're referencing some sort of Angular application, but that application doesn't exist, right? It's coming from Angular, the Angular.js file, and it's like, this doesn't exist, and so we're gonna have some issues here, right? So we need to fix this. A lot of the times, clicking on this takes you to the Angular side, and we might have to look at these messages to determine, right? So this says failed to instantiate module my app due to, well, our app not being there, right? I mean, that's the thing. We know that that's happening right now. So we're going to fix that. We're going to go here, and in our app.js, we are going to create our first, right? Create our Angular app. Okay, so we're gonna our Angular app. Here we go. So I'm gonna say const app is equal to Angular. Because we loaded the Angular library, we have access to the Angular library, right? And it's being referenced through the Angular keyword, much like jQuery is represented through the $sign. And we're going to create our module. Okay, our module takes the name of our module, and it takes these empty brackets for now. We'll get into those brackets later. But so create our first Angular app. I'm going to say /module, right? Because this is really our app. So the app is kind of instantiated as a module. Okay, that's the name of our app, right? So if we did this and I had gone back here, maybe to the document, I refreshed, still kind of erroring out here. So let's, oh, hold on a second. I got to turn off my notifications. So the notifications from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Right? Bloop. All right. Won't get any more of those. Sweet. So now what we're telling it here, we're saying let's make the variable app, you know, that's equal to the module. Easy enough, right? The first argument must match the application name that we chose, right? So my app was the name that we chose. Whatever the name is, has to mention that. And the second argument right now is just going to be an empty array, okay? It's going to be really simple, but that array later on can also include additional services that can be passed down to our controllers, because the next thing that we're going to be doing is our controllers. The controllers themselves also have access to specific functionality that we can pass into it as well. So we're going to open this up. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to create our first controller, okay? And since we instantiated our app Angular module in app, kind of like Express, require Express is equal to Express, and like instantiating that. Doing the same thing here. Here we have controller. And we're going to give it a name, main controller. And we're going to use function here. Now, a lot of times you've been used to using the ES6 syntax for fat arrows, but we have to use old school function here. And the reason is you know what? It's going to be funny because the reason is this. Huh? And does anyone, know why or what is the limitation to the fat arrow function versus this function using the function keyword? I had gotten that on interview questions before.
Doesn't this actually like run right now versus having to be called later on? Is that what
so you're saying if we used the function keyword versus the fat arrow?
Yeah.
I don't believe that that's it. So it's something running immediately on page load or application load won't necessarily make a difference unless we call that function to load, right? Unless we instantiated that function. Call the function, put parens around it. I mean, this is an anonymous function here, right? So it is a callback. But what I'm trying to reference here, and the reason I kind of stated the difference between the fat arrow and the function word, and then I just said is this, just so happened to land on that. What does the keyword this have to do with fat arrow versus using the function keyword?
I believe it's regarding the binding.
Okay.
So like this is not bound to the controller, the app. It's bound to the arrow function.
So yeah, an arrow function loses or cannot hold on to its own concept or scope of this. A function keyword does hold on to the scope of this. But if you were to create a fat arrow, the fat arrow loses that construct of this. This, it doesn't have an internal version of this. It needs to go up and look at its parent scope for whatever this is being referenced. Okay, that's the difference between the two. So the scope of this bleeds outside of a fat arrow, or it cannot hold it or bind to that. So you're right, Christian. And so that's what we're doing. So we have to use ES5 function as our second argument. It won't work as expected. And once again, once it's working, we can go back and test it out and see what the error is so that we can verify that that is the problem. And then we can resolve it, right? Go back here and just resolve it. So now that we have our controller and we're just saying this.hello, that's all we're really saying. I just want to say hello. I'm going to go back to my index file. Cool, I'm going to go back and I'm going to add another directive. When I went here to the directives, we already added ng app. I'm going to add the ng controller, attaches the controller of MVC to the view portion of our application. So I'm going to go back in here, and in the body here, I'm going to say ng dash controller, right, is equal to, and I'm going to say main controller, what is that? main controller as CTRL. So what we're going to be able to do here is give the main controller kind of a shorthand. So I'm going to do it as shorthand. I'll do it as a longhand, and then you can see the difference between the two. But if we state that this is going to be main controller will be referenced as, that's really what this statement states. That if I had to kind of like verbally express what this is, I would say main controller will be referenced as CTRL within the application. That's kind of where we're going, okay? So we know that our data is in the app, right? And we want to access that data, right? And so we created this .hello, and I had manually put an H1 on the screen just to test that it worked, right? So we were able to confirm that this application works with my H1 on the screen, right? Looks like it works. Still getting this error here. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this controller. So here's our controller. In the H1, I'm going to reference ctrl.hello. Okay, so if our controller is here, and if in our app, here's our controller, our main controller, and our main controller has a you know, a kind of a global variable, right? Because you don't see anything before this. We're not using let, var, or const to define this variable. We're just calling the variable, we're giving it a name and that kind of elevates the scope of this to be a global scope to this thing, right? So I'm going to go back into the app, and here where I said hello, I'm going to replace this. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to keep this, just going to comment it out. So you can see what it was before, and that worked, right? I'm going to add another H1. And in here, I'm going to do opening and closing curly braces, ctrl.hello. Okay? .hello. And so this .hello.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
You have an extra caret before your H1.
Yes, I do. Look at that. Good looking out. And let's see if this works. Did I not? No. So something else is happening here.
You gotta save your app.js, I think.
Yeah, so why is it? So here's my app.js. Here's app.js.
Yeah.
Everything
You gotta
looks.
save it.
What's that?
You gotta save it.
Oh, is that the whole reason? Oh, man. All right. Nope.
Line 11 in your JS. I mean your HTML. SCR should be SRC.
Oh, there we go. There we go. All right, cool. Thanks for picking that up. And so, you know what? I just want to change this to be the other. I want to see SRC, SCR, right? I want to see what the error message is again, and if it gives us any indication, right? So it's just, hey, module injector. So it's telling us that we're not able to inject this module, right? Fail to instantiate module app due to something, right? And maybe it's, you know, telling us where the thing would exist. And so I just want to see, because if we hit an error like this again, you'll kind of know where to go to fix this. And so we're trying to say, load the app, and we're referencing some stuff in it, this controller, and well, the thing doesn't exist, right? So let's change that. And now we should work. And I have this one, that extra came back again. All right, sweet. Put the space here. So what we're doing here, once again, what we're doing is our application loads, and our application is kind of, I almost call it like, in my mind, I'm thinking mounting. I'm mounting my application here at this top level. That's what I'm doing. And the scope of my application now can control everything inside of the HTML. And then in the body, I'm saying, hey, I'm breaking my application into functionality. One of the pieces of functionality is this main controller. I want this main controller to do certain things and have access to a certain portion of the application. And so I add the directive here for that main controller. We're just going to reference it as controller. And then anything inside of the controller, right, we can access. CTRL is the controller, really. That's the other name. And then this .hello would be it. So if I had done this, if I had not done the CTRL and I just said main controller, this should work just as well. Oh, what happened? Did I misspell it? Okay, it's not working. I don't even see any errors. Just gonna make sure this thing is still working. Oh yeah, okay. I think with this, with this construct here, we have to do something else inside of the app.js. I'm gonna take a look at some of the apps I built before.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
I'm getting a weird error. It's saying I'm missing a parentheses, but I'm clearly not.
That's one of those. Clearly not, or.
Well, I mean, it's there. It's there's.
All right. Do you want to show your screen, and we can take a look at it?
It's probably somewhere in your app.js.
Yeah.
You have to stop.
I'm gonna put this into, just in case, right? One of the things just to help us move forward. Okay. So I'm pasting. Oh, I gotta stop sharing, right? All right. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, I'm getting missing after argument list, but it's right here.
You need a comma on line 5 after main controller.
See? Well, see, I knew that was weird because I'm like, I have the closing parentheses, but now I'm getting nothing.
Did you change the controller name? Like, go back to your HTML, I think. Did you change it as, nope, CTRL, new controller as control, and you saved the app.js, everything's saved, right?
I'm gonna do it again.
The main controller function, this .hello. Get out of the responsive.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know if it's something to do with responsive, but considering I think it's going to work for everyone else. Yeah.
Okay. I don't even know where my.
I don't know where it disappeared to. I think you're not in full. Oh, you got to go to DevTools. That's where you got to go to.
It won't come up though. This is Dev. I think this is DevTools.
Okay. So then copy the URL, open up another browser window, and.
I don't know what the hell is going on now.
Open up another.
Here, I'll just go to my terminal.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, we're still not seeing the. Still not seeing. Oh, you're still in developer.
I took it off. Yeah.
Yeah, just to go into HTML elements. Go into the elements. No, go into the elements tab. Elements tab. Go in there. Go into the body and just take a look and see. Is the H1 body? No, that's the head. Go down. Go into the body. There's your H1. It just says class ng binding. So I'm going to stop sharing. Let me share, Aaron. Just so that we can see that when you do go in here and you do take a look, you see how it's doing the ng binding. So ng binding, I'm just going to take a look at the directives, right? So let's take a look. Oh, sorry. Let me share. We go to the Angular directives. Is there ng bind, right? So this is ng bind, replaces the value of HTML control with the value specified in the Angular expression. And this is ng binding. So this is being put in there by Angular, and we would put bind if we wanted to manually do something. These are kind of the manual directives that we would be able to do. And so it's binding to OHAL, and it's putting that content there. So it knows that this context here, this text, is coming from our app. It's coming from here. It's binding to that context, whatever we put in here. Okay, so it is saying that there is a relationship there between the two. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why yours isn't coming up, Aaron. I'll just paste my body. Like I said, I don't know why. Let's paste the body just in case. Maybe you copy and paste the body, kind of get it up and running. And the ng app. Is anyone else having any issues? Like weird issues like that where it's just not showing at all? Any errors? All good? Okay, sounds good. All right. So what we're going to do is, right, so if we tested everything, this is what our app should look like, right? Pretty basic, not a lot going on. We have our H1, we're showing our H1. We have NG app as the kind of module, our controller as being our controller. Now there's a series of other directives, okay? And we're going to go over a few of these, but we're not going to use all of them as of right now. I don't know if we're going to use .click as of right now. Actually, we might. NG repeat is similar to just running a like a for loop. Or what are some of the array methods that you use to loop over an array? Does anybody remember? We did learn that, right? I think Matt went over that. What's that?
For each.
Yeah, for each, map, filter, right? They're all looping constructs for an array. Which one just loops over something and doesn't return anything? Does anyone know? Just curious. No? So if I just said array looping methods, and we know that there is for each, map, filter. I'm even going to put in a reduce. I think Ian, you're going to have fun. You like the algorithm stuff. Reduce is a pretty cool one to kind of work with. Does anyone know which one of these doesn't return anything? I don't think we've used a lot of the array looping methods, correct? You've been focused on using which looping construct thus far?
Doesn't map just look through everything and see what's in there?
Map touches everything. Filter touches everything. Reduce touches everything. And for each touches everything. They all touch every element in the array. Only one of these does not return anything, even if I told it to return.
Maybe for each.
Yes. For each is the only one that doesn't return anything. Okay? So, I'm just bringing up the similarities, right? The fact that I'm bringing this up is something that I want to emphasize, even though we're not walking down this array looping construct yet. We will be using an array. We're going to be using ng repeat to loop over the array and do something with it. But I just thought it would be a good opportunity to tie that in with the array looping methods that you've already learned about, but you haven't really been working with on a regular basis. And these are the four you have to master, okay? And for each is the only one that loops but does not return. Map returns, filter returns, reduce returns. They give back something, but for each is just like, I'm going to loop over it. I'm going to touch it. That's it. My job's done. I don't have to give you back anything, okay? So just wanted to point that out. So we have ng repeat is to repeat over an array, loop over something, right? Ng source is going to allow us to kind of do the source to, say, an image file or something like that. Anything that had a property of source, we can reference it here. ngIf is going to be running some sort of if conditional logic. So if I'm going to get back to this message here. If we do ngIf, removes or creates HTML elements based on an expression, right? Repeat repeats HTML template once per item in the specified collection. ngClick specifies custom behavior when an element is clicked, okay? So these methods, and then show and hide also are going to be what? Show, display HTML elements based on the value of the specified expression. And along with hide, right? Hide would hide the thing based on the expression. So we can run some logic that say show it or not show it. And you did that in your apps with like conditional logic, like, hey, if this thing is on, I remember like the fruits app that Matt was building out, if the little checkbox was selected, then do this, else do this, right? We can do that with show. We can set variables to be true or false or matching conditions and say, if the variable is true, show this thing. If it's not, show this thing. We can even use this with like CSS, change CSS based on specific variables also. Okay, so we're gonna add a little a little styling to our app. Okay, let's see what we're gonna do here. This is our little styling. First, let's add a little CSS, and then we'll loop through this ng repeat. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. So in our app, we could connect to a CSS file if we wanted to, or once again, the fact that we have style tags, what does that mean? What does that allow us to do with these style tags? Any idea?
Style directly from HTML instead of opening app.
Now,
CSS.
that's not really something that we possibly would want to encourage, right? I personally don't like adding style tags into HTML. I prefer to separate the concerns between HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can put these style tags anywhere you want. I'm going to just kind of copy it and put it into the, I'll put it into the head here. So I'm just going to copy it. I don't feel like typing it all out. Once again, so we're adding style tags. This is not inline style. Inline style is if we added a style attribute here. But the closer the CSS is to the element, the more precedence it has, or the more effect it will have on the element itself. So adding it here has more prominence than if I added it in a CSS file. This would overwrite whatever in the CSS file. If I added a style tag here, this would overwrite whatever here, would overwrite whatever in a CSS file, okay? So let's go. Here's some data for our contacts. We're going to kind of be displaying some things, right? So I have the name, phone, some contacts. We're gonna add this data inside of our app, okay, our app.js file, okay? So let's go into our app. I'm gonna copy this. Here, I'm gonna if no one has file open up, I keep forgetting. I feel like it's been forever since I taught, so pasting everything in. I'm gonna add this here, this.contacts. I'm gonna put that into our app. So here's our app controller, right? So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna add and paste it right there. It's gonna collapse it so you can see that it's right there. And I will select this out right now. So copy and paste that. I'm just gonna put in here, you know, click. Gonna make sure. I haven't done a thumbs up today. So just click on the thumbs up when you're caught up to where we are right now, at least with the data.
Hey, Joe, you put that script tag right above your body controller, right? I just want to make sure.
You mean the script tags? I put it inside the head. It doesn't really matter where it is. It could be inside the head. It could be inside the body. It could be anywhere. I put it inside the head. There's like different places to put style tags. Once again, I'd like to keep my styling segmented, and putting it inside of the head is kind of where I would default to put it. I don't know, it said, didn't tell us where to put it. Let's just add a little style. Okay. 16. Just want to make sure everyone's good. 17. And this is all new stuff too. So I don't want to lose anyone on the first day we're introducing a new topic. Go. All right, looks good. We got enough. Now we're going to go into the index file, right? So here, I'm just going to move this over. Here's our index file. So here's our body, right? I'm just going to move this up. I can kind of align it. So here's our controller as controller, right? This was just us saying hello. Now I'm going to add another element. I'm going to have a div. Okay. I'm going to do add the div ng repeat another directive, right, is equal to contact in CTRL dot contacts. Okay. So ultimately what we're saying is repeat is the directive. Repeat for every contact in this array of contacts. Do the following thing. Wants us to create a data table, and we're going to add here contact.name. Okay? I'm going to do that. I'm going to save it. I'm going to copy paste this. I'll put it into the classroom. Boink. Okay. What that should do is display their names. Okay? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to, save it. Go back to my document. Refresh. Ta-da! My document is updated. Okay? So take a moment to update the HTML and just click on someone add a thumbs up and make sure that that works. If you have any issues, let me know. We'll work through it.
Just a heads up, Joe, in the Markdown, that DT is an opening DT, not a closing one. You have it, but I'm just saying in the Markdown that you copied and pasted, there's no closing DT.
Oh, there's no closing. Okay. Got it. Wow. I wonder if it still works. Let me see. Does it still work? Did it break it? No, it still works. Let's see, does it? Yeah, it adds a closing DT. So it'll work with or without it. I mean, I prefer to write the HTML as it should be, but. Now, what I want you to kind of, conceptualize here is the benefits of doing this. What if, and we will be doing this in the afternoon, but what if we could ask the database or hit a route and ask the route for a list of contacts, right? So we go into, we hit a route that's like / contacts. We use Ajax in our JavaScript file. Our JavaScript file goes and hits the server sends back an array of contacts. We store that array of contacts here, right? So we would make some sort of Ajax request, we'd populate contacts here, and then the minute contacts is updated, the minute that becomes updated, and we get the data, our HTML is kind of connected to it, and it would loop through and then create those contacts, right? So imagine if we had buttons here to like change it between different types of contacts or categories of contacts, to go to the database, get the category of contacts, then to show those names. That's where this really starts to take off when you're building single page apps. This is all happening on the front end. Kind of like, it's almost like we're taking a step back to Unit 1 conceptually, where Unit 1 was just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and we had the ability to manipulate the front end and get data and update it all via jQuery, right? Now we're doing it all via Angular, okay? So instead of using jQuery to manipulate it, Angular is doing it, right? And in jQuery, we didn't like mount our Angular module and like mount our, controller. We didn't do any of that. All you saw inside of our HTML file was a reference to jQuery and the application. That was it. Everything else was just straight up HTML. It was in the app.js file where jQuery was working its magic. But here, if we were to take a look at the application, you would see how this application is constructed, okay? And you're going to see this same construct, right? Let me just see. Just looking through some other things that I'd worked on. iView. So I'm just going to show just another quick little app. This is a little app built in Mad Libs. You might have remembered or done Dash. Does anyone remember Dash? The Dash for the pre-work. I'm sure a few of you might have remembered doing Dash as part of the pre-work. So Dash they have, it's not built in Angular. I kind of refactored this to be Angular, but this is an Angular app. If I take a look here, let me see where Angular is running. So I go here, see right here? It's the same thing. So I have, hey, I called it my app, standard thing, right? I'm gonna call it my app. I'm gonna see references here to things like, hey, ng submit. If I submit the form, I execute ng submits. I have a submit function that I call from within my app, okay? If I go to sources, I should be able to see, I don't know if it's giving me the JavaScript here. Yeah, it's not sending over the JavaScript. Just see if it does or it doesn't. No, it doesn't send over the JavaScript. So I'm just seeing the HTML. It's not giving me the JavaScript, but if we could see the JavaScript, you would see what's happening here. But in the HTML just itself, you do see the fact that we are referencing the app here. And I'm just looking for if I have the controller anywhere. I don't see the controller here. Controller. Nope. I just have in the form, I have this ng scope and some other things. ng pristine, ng invalid, ng invalid required. These are all kind of form-based concepts for Angular. Okay. All right. Cool. So we're good, right? Everyone's good so far. Looks like almost everyone's. We only got like 16. All right. So is anyone having issues? Anyone come across something? Awesome. All right. So now what we want to do is add those images. So if we take a look at our data, right? Our data has their name, their phone, their state, and their image. Now we've just looped through and only put their contact name. That's really all we did. But we have an image. So I'm going to go back into the HTML here. I'm just going to move it up so I can kind of align these two here. We don't get lost here. All right, I'll move this over in a minute. And I want to put the image first. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to say, we're in this container. So the only line that I really need to add is this one line right here. You know what? I'm just going to do this. Let me copy and paste this. I'll Slack it out too. Okay. And so what we're saying here is this. Image, the ng source is equal to the contact name, right? So we're saying, oh, contact image, and then the alt is just, an image of whatever the contact name is, if the image wasn't available. Okay, because we're inside of this ng repeat, we need to reference this ng directive here to reference the source. Okay, now if we run this, I saved it, right? If we go here, now refresh the page, we'll have the images, right? Cool, images are there. If I once again highlight one of these images, I will see that there's this ng repeat. I can clearly see that the ng repeat would be happening. Here's the ng source, and we have the source of it, and we have the ng binding. So anytime you're binding to data, like a piece of data, the ng binding is going to be present, even though in our code there is no reference to ng binding. That's something that Angular adds for us. So when we're looking through this, so what you'll be able to see is when you do investigate applications on the web, or you're investigating HTML of sites that you like and you want to replicate, you might see, if you do see any reference to NGs, you know that that's going to be an Angular app. Okay, and kind of what they're doing. Oh, it's binding to data, so that must mean that data's in the application and we're retrieving it from the application and we're storing it here, right? I'm just going to say, what if I did get rid of source? That still works. Okay, you want to add the source though. Okay, that will break at some point in time. Okay, if we went to Angular directives, do they have the ng source? No, they don't put here it as one of the directives needed. So maybe it's a something categorized down here, but Now we can see all of our contacts, right? All of them, we see their pictures there. Okay. We can add even more information. There's more in the app, right? We have name, we just have phone, state. We did the image. So let's add some additional information, right? Let's move this over so we can see the whole thing here. All right. So we have our image. We have the DT. What we're going to do here is create a, I think DL is for like data list. It's not something that I use very often. Take a look and see the context, but that's the data table, and then the ED, and I'm going to say contact.state and DD contact.phone. Okay. Now, if we do that, I'm going to add that. I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back to the document. I'm going to refresh it. And what happened to my images? Oh, there we go. All right, cool. So I have all my contact, right? Because of the DT, I think that's why it's moving this over here. Okay, I'm going to go back here. Just going to paste that. Okay, make sure you're caught up with that. I'm just going to take a look at the, we're waiting for everyone to catch up. DL, HTML element. Not something I use very often here. The DL represents a description list. There you go. The element encloses a list of group items. Huh, okay. I wonder if it's like an older school thing to use this. Differences between HTML1 and 5. Okay. I would almost think like, I would do something like DL versus UL. And like, which one would be used? Hey, should we use DL over UL? What scenarios do you use those? Screen readers, software. The DL is a definition list. Should be used in such a case as perhaps a dictionary. Okay. So I almost think what we should be using is maybe like a data table is what I would think this would probably be better off as, like a data table, but you know, that was the choice. Cool. Anyone having any issues? I see just 9, 10, 11, 12. We just got 12, 13. Click on it. Let's get that number up. Yeah, I guess the question while we're waiting for everyone, does it seem easier to write code like this, how we're doing it now, versus using EJS templates? Anyone want to weigh in on it? How's everyone feeling about writing Angular like this versus using some sort of EJS template?
I like it versus not having to use the little squizzards that we had to do on EJS. It seems a lot more clean and easy to read.
Yeah, and it does. It's clearly that's the effect that we're having, right? Unless somebody else wants to weigh in.
Yeah, I kind of like how you can define where it is that you're going to get this information. You know, like we say ng repeat contacts, you know, it knows exactly what to go do. I like that part of it.
Yeah. The whole idea, I mean, when we had an EJS template, we sent the data and then we did a for loop over the array and then we did it, right? So EJS didn't necessarily provide us some sort of looping construct, right? It just allowed us to enumerate JavaScript functionality or code within the template. So when we're using ng repeat, this is something like there is a difference between, and it might come up in like conversation or as you're starting to learn. I'm just kind of throwing in some additional facts. Declarative versus imperative programming. Okay? And the difference is imperative means you state exactly what needs to get done. So imperative, I would say imperative is using for loops. That's imperative. You have to tell it exactly what the starting number is, like I have to initialize that starting counter. I have to tell it when it should stop. I have to tell it how to count. That's imperative. Declarative is using something like a map or for each or ng repeat, right? We don't tell those things how to manage the loop. We just declare that we must loop, and it loops, okay? So the difference between imperative programming is it is imperative that you tell the thing what to do at every step of the way, and that's what a for loop is. Declarative kind of extrapolates that functionality, and you just have to say the magic word loop, and then it loops, and then you just have to know how to use it, right? So with a map, it would be like map, and then you would grab the elements and work on the element. In ng repeat, we say something more like, contact in the array of contacts, right? So this kind of represents more like the for in or for of array. Does anybody remember for in, for of when looping over arrays? Do you remember which one to use? I knew Matt had shown this. The difference between these two constructs here, when you use for in and when you use for of, right? Okay, so for of is used for arrays. Here's an array, and so you use for of array. That's kind of how I remember it. Of array, just kind of rolls off my tongue. And then in would be used for looping over objects. So this is an object. For in object, okay? So this particular instance here where we're doing the loop is similar to that kind of construct for of array, right? It's doing it as in, seemingly like it's a list of an object, but it's an array, right? It's an array of things that we're looping over, okay? So the next thing that we're gonna take a look at here is the ngIf, right? So maybe we don't want to show images, maybe we do want to show images. So if we didn't want to show images, or we could set this value to be something initially. And one second. If we wanted to show images, I'm just going to put it here. Here's our, like, at the top where we would declare our variables. I'm going to say this dot show images is equal to false, right? And if we say false and we go into the HTML, right? So here's our HTML. I'm just going to move this over a little bit. So when I open this up, I might be able to see some more. What we're going to say is, in our ng right here, right? So move this down. ng source contact image. We have the image itself. We can then add this little ngIf control show images, right? So I'm going to add that. I'm going to add it at the very end here, right? It's its own thing on the other side. ngIf, and we can do this too when we start having multiple things. You can go to the next line to start declaring them. It makes it easier to see what's being run, right? So ngIf is equal to ctr dot show images, right? I don't know why it keeps doing that. Show images. All right. Okay. And because that is, I'm going to save it, because that is defined as false here, right? Because it's defined as false, it's going to be processed as false on the front end. And so this runs our conditional logic. Okay? So if I save that, I go here and I refresh. It's going to go to our app. I refresh. We don't see any images, right? Okay, so I'm going to just copy paste that. There we go. That's all you had to add, not a lot. All you really had to add is that ngIf, okay? But we still need to show images. Once again, the ability to query and decide what to do. And so this is also kind of, you know, declarative program. Just It's not as though we have to do, if this thing is true, then do that. It already knows. ngIf is just like, if this thing is true, show this element. So if we went into the HTML now, let's just take a look. Is the element even there, right? So I don't see the element. I see a placeholder for show images because we made the decision not to show it. So we can see here that it's added a comment in our HTML saying, hey, this is a placeholder for it. And as far as we're concerned, we're not supposed to be showing images because it's false. Just think if you had a button and you wanted to see more info. Maybe you wanted to click on the person's name and then see their profile to the right. So this page could just be divided between, you know, contextual information and then additional information. If you clicked on the person, then you could see the additional information here. Maybe the information is there, it's just set to false. If you click on it, you go to the backend, sets it to true. You could see additional information. Maybe the whole box is set to false. Go to the backend, change it to true, you see the box. Okay? Cool. And once again, if we, you know, change that to be true, right? I went to app and I change this to be true now, we should see it, right? I say true, go back here, we'll get access to those elements again. And if we explore in here, we'll see ngIf is there, but also our images, okay? And you'll see an opening ngIf and ngIf, right? So it's kind of showing both of them. Cool. Oh. Oh. Just doing a little poll here. Okay. There you go. I just want to see if you're liking Angular based on what you've seen. So do you like it? Sweet. Don't see what the big deal is. Yeah, I don't know. Whoever chose that, slack me on the side. I'll do my best to convince you. Or just see. Once again, I'm always like what your perspective is. So if you don't see how it's being used or the kind of how it could make development easier, maybe we do a comparison to how you've been creating stuff. Because next week, I mean, later today, we're going to be using Ajax and we're going to be importing data and then building that. So you're going to get your hands working with that. Next week, we're going to combine Angular on the front end and Node and the Express server on the back. But the Express server will just be rendering data. So we still need to set up a Mongo database. We still need routes. We need to query and we need to get data back. So you'll see at that point in time if the way we're writing this is just cleaner code, right? This is just, to me, once again, without those little, I call them the squids in EJS, you know, the greater than sign, paren, percent sign equals. Without those, this to me just seems more intuitive. I want something that's more intuitive to understand. And that's more intuitive. Cool. So went in here, we saw it all. If we show images, we see images, okay? Once again, we can show, hide. Now, there's another directive that we can use, this show and hide info, okay? So I'm going to go into the app.js, and you know how we had show images. I'm going to say this dot show info is equal to false, okay? So now we're going to make decisions on whether we should show information or not show information, right? Okay, we did that earlier using ngIf. ngIf, if it's true, show it. If it's not, don't show it. What we're going to do is add another directive here, the ng-show. And the ng-show, I'm going to use double ctrl.show info. And I'm going to add this to, oh no, this was to the data. Sorry, I'm gonna move this, add it right here and right here, boom. Okay, so I'm just gonna add the ng show there. Let's put this in here, okay. You're just gonna add the ng show here. And it's another way of running this kind of conditional logic. To ng show the thing if it exists, or ng hide if it doesn't, and then we'll see in the DT would kind of see ng show, and then we'd see it or we wouldn't see it. So this says false, that we shouldn't see it. So I'm going to save this, go back to our file, refresh it, and now I don't see those two pieces of contact info. And if I go in here, I can see DL, I see ng show, they're there, but I don't see it. So what's the difference between the ng show and the ng if? So I'm going to do this. Clearly, ng show is set to false, and we don't see these two pieces of info. I'm going to go into app.js and say show images set to false, and refresh. I'm going to go back and investigate. Can anyone tell me what the difference is between using the ng if and the ng show? Any
So it
take?
kind of looks like similar to like the display none in CSS, where it's physically in the DOM or the HTML document, but it's just not visible. And then the if is just, it's not there, period.
Exactly, right? So it's clear to see that this if states whether the element will ever appear in the DOM, just not being shown, versus it being shown, it being added but not being shown. So this is more like display none, where the element's just not there. It's kind of removed from the DOM. And this is maybe like an opacity of 0 or something, a height of 0. Thing is kind of there, but it's not there. And look, if you take a look at the properties, look, it says display none. So it's actually there. Boom, boom, right? But there is no image thing here for me to click on. So the element is not even there. It was never added to the DOM. Here it was added to the DOM, but it has a display of none. And the important. Does anyone know what the exclamation important is being used for? It's not something you use very often. Somebody's got to know what it is. Come on. Nobody?
Joe, is that like not important?
What's that?
The exclamation point just telling us that's not important?
No.
Doesn't it override like the cascading? Like if there's something else below it, it'll make it more important.
Yeah. So it's actually, Lauren, it's the opposite of that. It's actually like make this thing the most important thing ever. Like anywhere where there is more specificity assigned to this element, anywhere where CSS, if I removed important, would override this setting, this kind of directive per se, I don't know, it's a property, but it's telling it that in no way, shape, or form can anything, any CSS ever override this. That's what it's saying, okay? If I went up to the actual element, I actually want to see if I said display block, see how it marks it, puts a line across it? Because, and I'm targeting the element specifically. This element style is actually going here and putting, look, display block. I'm putting my CSS as close to the thing as possible, and the closer you are to something, the more importance you would have over it. But this important says, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that. If I got rid of important, let me say, see block would take effect, and we would see California. This takes effect now because it's closer to it, even though display none is here. Without the important property, without doing important here, something can override this. This is a last resort. But what you're going to see is Angular's attempt is like, as Angular is like, I don't know where you put your settings. I don't know what your CSS is. All I know is as part of the application logic, if this thing does not meet the conditions, it should not show. And I need to force this thing not to show by forcing it to inherit display none. If important is not there, there's a chance that you might have settings that targeted this thing in the past and gave it some other display property. And because it's so specific that CSS path, or because you use an ID, that would override this, important takes over. Okay. Cool. So we're looking good. Awesome. So let's move on. So we did the ng show, right? So now let's move on to ng click. Okay. So I'm going to go back into our app. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm going to go into our controller. And so in our controller, we can add some additional logic like functions. Think of it like, I'm going to try to compare this to maybe like a class or an object. You know, when we instantiated a new class of something, we could give them methods, or we created an object itself and we just gave it some methods. This is very similar to that. So if we wanted to, you know, add a method here, right? That's what I would consider this. It is kind of a function, but I would kind of consider this just a method. So let's just do this. This dot toggle info is equal to fat arrow. We have the concept of this. Since we're inside the function, we can allow the concept of whatever's inside of here, of this to bleed out. Doesn't matter. We don't need to use the function keyword here. And I can say this dot show info is equal to not this dot show info. Okay, and what we're telling it to do is this. When you click on something, whatever show info was, turn it to the opposite. That's where this exclamation is not. Turn it to the opposite of what it is. So if it is false, make it not false, which is going to make it true. If it's true, make it not true, which will turn it into false. That's really what we're doing. This is a standard way of toggling between trues and falses. So instead of saying, you know, if show info is equal to true, set it to be false, right? Else set it to be true, something like that. This wraps it up into one thing. So now that we have this method, right? That's what I consider it, kind of like a method within our application. I'm going to go and we're going to leverage this. I'm going to go here. And we're going to add a button into our controller here. So I have, here's our little controller. And in here, I'm going to say, hey, let's add a button. And this button is going to have a directive, ng click. So if this thing gets clicked, I want you to do this thing. So we're going to go to our controller, and I'm going to execute the toggle info function, right? I'm going to say here, give you a, the button needs to say something, toggle info, right? Let's just do that. Okay, so I'm going to select this out. Okay. And I'm going to save this. Let's test it out. It's kind of cool. I really like Angular. Toggle info. Oh, no. Let me see. Did I break something? I don't see it doing it. So let me take a look and see, because it doesn't look like it's toggling. I'm not getting any errors. So I would say my logic is working, but there's something.
You didn't save the JS file.
Oh, that's why. Okay. Thank you. Here we go. There we go. Bloop, 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 bloop. Toggle, right? It's like jQuery toggle. jQuery, grab the element, grab the button, toggle. If the button is clicked, toggle. That's what jQuery was doing too. It's the same thing. Okay? Right? So I would kind of consider this maybe like a controller method, right? If there's anything that you pulled out of like Unit 1 in regards to objects and classes, is methods. And that looks just like a method to me, okay? So we can see how the just changing things here allows us to change it here. So if I had to make a decision between using Angular now or jQuery, right? Let me just put here. Oh, Angular or okay, here we go. If you had to go back, you know what Angular, you know what jQuery is like. Oh, I didn't do it in honest, but it doesn't really matter. Which one would you prefer to do? And just think, this is the tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg with Angular. I mean, there's a lot more that we can do, okay? And this is kind of the base functionality, but I think you can see the power of using Angular to build out an app versus having to write everything in jQuery. And if jQuery was do more, write less and do more, Angular is even taking that further. We can do even more by writing less, right? And that's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to like build out the application as quick and possible. And what I also want to point out here with Angular is this. If I hired you to come and support our application and you went to our app.js file, could you make sense of it? Like, is it clear that you know where to go to look for the name of the application? Is it clear that you could distinguish this module from maybe another module, right? Those things become really clear when you're looking at an Angular application. If you were doing this in jQuery, once again, you could have called your things anything you wanted, and then I have to look for those things and build a relationship between them. I don't want to do that. If I know that this app, this module is being created, and I see it being referenced here, then I know that that's a controller. It's clear, there's no misunderstanding that that's a controller, right? When we were doing it in Express, right? How did you know that you had controllers? Can you tell me how you knew in Express you had controllers? If I looked at your app, how would I know that you had kind of that MVC model and that controllers were being used?
By looking at the file structure.
Correct, right? If I looked at your file structure, I could have saw a folder called controllers. Did you need to call it controllers? Pooja?
The main folder, no, but the actual controllers inside the controllers, yes.
Okay, so you're saying I needed to call the controllers folder controller. Is that what you're saying?
No, you have three. I mean, the file structure is like you have model, views, and controllers. And inside controllers folder, you have, say, user controller or session controller. Sure. Then you need to call user controller, but not the, oh yeah, but you need to give the path controller/user controller.
Yeah. Okay. What I'm kind of saying here is I could have called that folder anything that I want, and I could have called the file anything I wanted to.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So the fact that we decided to call it controllers was a naming convention so that if we looked at your apps, we know that controller has the controllers, right? Yeah. It made sense that way. But the Express app was not configured to mandate that a controllers folder had to be called controllers or the file had to be called users controller, right? I think when I was doing the lecture on authentication, there was a discrepancy between like the name of the file. It was just called users.js, but it was in controllers, right? But the rest of the I'm sorry, when we built it out, it was like users_controllers, but everything else in the lecture was just users.js, right? So they didn't have to update the lecture. So there was confusion there, right? There is no confusion here as to what the controller is for this application. It's pretty clear cut. And there is no other way for us to bind a controller to our application without using controller. Do you see? that this framework is much more strict in how it's constructed. Node and Express is much more fluid and allows you to do whatever you want. You want to create an MVC model that makes sense, create it. You want to create some other new invention? Hell, do that thing too. We don't care. We're giving you the tools. You build whatever you want to build, right? When it comes to these types of frameworks, they are much more strict and regulated in how they do things, okay? And that's the difference here, how they do things. Cool. All right. I think we missed our little break. So why don't we take another break, and when we come back, I'll assign the lab, maybe answer any questions. 12:06, 12:26. Come back at break time. Come back at 12:26. In the back. Boom. Let's get started. Sweet. Put us back. Let's jump into the lab. Lab time. Okay. Represent. Old school. Old school. I was looking at this earlier wondering, I wonder if that's like real gold. Probably not, right?
I don't know. Back in those days, it might have been.
Might have been real gold.
Might is a
Gold
key.
plated. Gold plated. Yeah. So what you're going to be doing is creating a page that's going to represent the users, these wrappers, and some of their info. Okay. You're gonna start with like just outputting this track here, putting some of the info. Then you have multiple tracks, which means this has got an ng repeat written all over it, right? Then you're going to start working with some of the directives, when you're creating the application, app, the controller. You understand this is used to enumerate the variables or the JavaScript, ng repeat, ngIf. What it's going to look like, once again, all depends on what you put together, is I was kind of like showing what the intent of the app is, right? This is the app. You're gonna output something just like this. You're gonna have some conditions here, like ngIf is going to, if we target Lil Wayne, we're actually gonna have some lyrics. If it's not Lil Wayne, then we just have the song itself. Okay, so just taking a look at like what that HTML would look like and seeing we have an app, we have a controller, we have some bindings, we have some ng repeats. Let me see if I can find the Lil Wayne one. Right, if I go to Lil Wayne here, let me see the UL, there'll be some ng bindings here, ngIf, so you're gonna see some ifs, just so that you have context of what you're looking to build. Really not a far stretch from what we just did, right? And I'll push up what we just did in just a minute. There is, let me see, where did I lose it? There is also a bonus. So the bonus is going to be something like this. Just see if you could do this. Here you go. Here's the bonus. You're going to create some sort of tool that if I go up, the number goes up. If I go down, it goes down. If we hit a negative number, so if it's less than 0, that to me sounds like an ngIf statement, right? If the number is less than 0, add a class. So this class is going to be something like this, ng class. You're going to have to look up the class, or ng style, new directives, right? And then you can reset it. Reset it takes it back to 0. These, of course, are at least 3 different methods within the controller. It'll be bound to this variable, and whenever that variable value changes within the controller, that would update, right? Anytime that happens. So that's the second one. I think there's also another one here, this Caesar Cipher one, which there's key up and there's ng model. You can bind to data. I don't have an example of that. That's just like the super bonus. I'm not sure a lot of people have been able to get to that. And then there's the super duper bonus. That's even possible, right? A stopwatch. So you have the logic. So once again, a lot of this is not structuring the application, maybe learning a few things here and there in regards to Angular, but a lot of it is also the ability to work code and understand the logic behind it too, right? So this is more algo stuff. So I can see someone like Ian being like, can we just start with the Caesar Cipher? I want to do the Caesar Cipher first. But I could be wrong. So let me break up, I got the rooms. I'm going to get everyone into their rooms. Everyone ready? Set, go. Stop sharing. Hmm. Oh, Christian, I didn't see you weren't assigned, so let me get you in a room here. Let me add you to breakout room 1. There we go. Sorry about that, Christian.